Alright, so today we are going to get a Microsoft SQL Server database up and running, and then we are going to get our SpringMVC application connecting to that database and pulling some information from it. So the first thing we'll need to do is download and install Microsoft SQL Server. I'll make sure that there's a link in the video description below, but if you simply Google search Microsoft SQL Server, it'll probably be the first thing to come up. Once you go to their Microsoft's download page for SQL Server, there's going to be three options. I went ahead and just used the Express Edition because it was free and easy, though you could use your free trial evaluation period or your Developer Edition if you so choose to. Once you have Microsoft SQL Server downloaded, the first two applications that we'll use, and the primary two applications that we will use, will be Microsoft SQL Server 2016 and then SQL Server 2016 Configuration Manager and Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio. So go ahead and open both of those up, and the first one we're going to use is the Configuration Manager. This is what the Configuration Manager looks like, and in here there's two things that we need to make sure are running. First of all, our SQL Server must be running. You can start and stop these just by right-clicking and saying start or stop. It's likely running by default, but if it's not, make sure it's started. The other thing is we need SQL Server Browser running. This is likely off and disabled. Make sure if you want to start it, you just need to go to Properties, go to Service, Start Mode, and change it to Automatic or Manual. It just can't be disabled. Once you change that, you should be able to right-click and start your service. So that's all we had to do to actually get our database running. Now we're going to go into the Microsoft SQL Management Studio, and in here we're actually going to get our databases set up. So just to walk you through a little bit, you're likely going to start this with nothing connected, and so you'll have to say connect a database engine, and this window will probably pop up. Actually, when you start it up, this window will most likely be started for you already, and the server name by default should already be in there. If not, it is the same name as if you go in here to Properties and Service, the host name right there, Josiah PC, that's just the name of my computer. You say Josiah PC, and then it's going to be SQL Express, which is found right here, SQL Express. Hopefully that's in by default for you, and you can just connect using Windows authentication, and when you hit connect, sure enough, your database is up. If you go into your databases folder, System Databases and Master, there's a folder called Tables, and these are essentially the giant tables, or will eventually be giant tables, most likely for a database, that populate our database. And we have System Tables, and this is where we're going to be creating our tables just as a good default location. So the first thing that we're going to need to do is create a table in our System Tables. To do this, we're going to execute a SQL query. So you can go ahead and hit New Query, and you should get a blank window just like this connected to this database right here. I already have this query written. It's very simple. I'll walk you through it. I'm calling create table, and then I specify a name for the table I want to create called greetings. By default, it will assume that this is going to go into master, and then DBO stands for database owner, master DBO.greetings. I could specify a different location if I wanted to, but I like the defaults just for the sake of this tutorial, so greetings is fine. Then I just need to specify the column names, and in this table it's going to be very simple. I'm just going to have two columns, one called ID and one called greeting. The ID column is going to be an integer. It must not be null, and I'm specifying that has an identity constraint of 1, 1. And what this means is that when I insert into this table, if I don't specify value of ID, it's going to start at the value 1, and then it's going to increment by 1 every single time. That way I don't have to constantly specify a unique ID for these. They'll just start at 1 and then go to 2, 3, 4, etc. The greeting column is a varchar 120. So essentially it's just a string with 120 characters, and I also want this to not be null. Lastly, I'm creating a primary key constraint on the ID column. Essentially what this means is I'm saying that the ID column must be unique, so no duplicates throughout the table, which means that if I have an ID for a particular greeting and I search the table with that ID, I am guaranteed to find the correct greeting for that ID. This is essentially the ID that's why it's called the primary key. It is the key to our table. I can search through the table using it. The only other thing I have in my query, and this is just kind of a good practice habit that I've been in while working in SQL, is the use of transactions. I begin a transaction, and then at the end I can either commit that transaction or roll back that transaction. So if I were to make a mistake while running this, there's not a great way to undo your mistakes, especially when deleting rows or modifying rows. So you want to use a transaction and then make sure that things actually ran correctly before committing, because once you commit, it's really hard to go back and undo your mistakes. So with nothing selected, I'm going to press F5 or execute, and it will say commands completed successfully, and for this case, that's all I really care about. I'm not going to roll back, I'm just going to commit. So I'll highlight over commit, which means the Management Studio is only going to run what's highlighted. So I'm just going to press F5 one more time, or the execute button, and it'll say commands completed successfully. And I might just press the F5 execute button one more time just to ensure that there weren't any other transactions laying around, and it will say the commit transaction request has no corresponding begin transaction, which is good. It means I didn't accidentally run this twice and I didn't need to commit it twice. But you don't want to leave an open transaction because it locks your database, and different connections can't come in and modify your tables anymore until that transaction is either committed or rolled back. So now we have this table. I just need to refresh my system tables, or maybe just refresh the whole database. There we go. Oh, it's not, I'm sorry, it's not in the system tables folder, it's just in the tables folder. So now we have this table called DBO greetings. Let's go ahead and see what's in it. So I have another query. I'm just going to highlight this row for now. Select star from greetings. Essentially saying I'm going to select all of the columns and all of the rows from greetings. Press F5, and we just get an empty ID of greeting. That makes sense because we haven't actually put anything into this table yet. So let's go ahead and put something in this table. I have another query that I've written here. I begin another transaction. That way if I messed something up, I can undo it with a rollback. I'm going to select everything from the table. I'm going to insert into my greetings table the following values. I'm just going to insert one, and it's going to be hello new user exclamation point. So this is a varchar right here. It's a series of characters forming a string, and it will fit nicely into the greeting column. I don't have to specify column names because there's only one column that I can actually insert to, because the other one is a primary key and it's set up to automatically increment. So I can just insert a greeting right into my table just with this line, and then I'm going to select again from that table, so that way I get two different views, one from before, one from after, and then I can decide if I want to commit that change or roll that change back. So with nothing selected, which will execute all of the code, I'll press F5, and you'll see there's that same empty table from the first select, then it inserted, and then it selected from the table again. You see I have an ID 1, and then I have a greeting of hello new user, which is exactly what I expected, and now I have to be sure to commit that. If for some reason I inserted something that was wrong, instead of having to go back and delete it using a different query, I could just roll that back, but this actually worked, so I will commit that. And then I can press F5 again to ensure that my commit transaction was not corresponding to any other transaction. It was indeed only one transaction running at a time, which was good. It's just kind of a habit that I'm in of pressing either commit or roll back again when I'm pretty sure there aren't any other transactions, just to ensure that I didn't accidentally forget about one. So now we have our database with a table called greetings, and it actually has a greeting in it. If we were to try and connect to this database and run a query on this table, we could potentially get this greeting right from the table. However, we still need to be able to connect using some sort of login from some other computer, let's say. So let me create a login for this database. Within the top level of my database, there's a security folder, and in here there's a logins folder. So I already have a standard user role created, so I'll walk you through the steps I took to create this so that way you'll have the exact same one. Right-click on Logins and click New Login. When that occurs, you should have a window that looks exactly like this Properties view, except you should be able to specify a name for your login. I called mine Standard User. You could call that whatever you want and specify whatever password you want. Just make sure you write them down so that way you can use them in your actual SpringMVC application in a little while. Once you have a new login and password, go ahead and just hit OK. And then what we need to do is on our top level here, right-click and say Properties, go to Security, and ensure that SQL Server and Windows Authentication Mode is checked. This will ensure that we can log in using SQL Server authentication, whereas before you were most likely only on Windows authentication mode, and this would have caused problems when you're actually trying to log in using that login that you just created. The next thing that we'll have to do, or we'll just have to ensure, is if you go to permissions, we need to make sure that this user that we created has the correct permissions. So we can see what permissions he has on this whole database in this permissions view. We'll just scroll down, find the standard user, and if we click on effective, we can see what permissions he has. Right now, he can connect to SQL and he can view any database. And this is because if you look in explicit, you can see that he has connect SQL granted. However, if you look at the view any database, he doesn't have this selected. This is because your standard user, if we go back to him in our logins and hit Properties, under server roles by default he should have public checked. So you should have all of the rights you need to be able to select from the database that we have. So now we have our standard user, which has the permissions that he needs, and we have our database set up to be able to allow this login to log in, and we have our database set up with a value in it. We are ready to get our SpringMVC application connecting to this database.